Hi, everyone. Today, we are going to be talking about a unique subject on the Nuts and Bolts of Writing podcast. I'm Fortunate Games, your podcast host. I also happen to be a writer, artist, and graphic novelist. Find out more about me using my Linktree link in the description. You can check out the rest of this podcast episode on YouTube and Anchor.fm. So today, we're going to be talking about something different from our usual discussions on movies and books and our own writings. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at how one of our co-hosts, Tete DePunk, had negative experiences with evangelical Christian homeschool in the US and how it affected her writing and sense of self. Joining us is our third co-host, Halivorn or R.N. Rovele, author of Lucky Wolf, a historical and psychological novel about the tumultuous relationship between a male practitioner of magic and a warrior in medieval Norse society. So the first question we have here is, Tete, why did your father decide to go with homeschooling? Was he part of a cult?
So my father's decision to go into homeschooling stems from the fact that during the late 80s, prior to meeting and marrying my mother through mail correspondence, which back in the 90s doesn't sound as strange as it would today, my father, unfortunately, due to a lot of emotional and psychological problems that he was also a heavy alcoholic. He got engrossed and carried away by the current of very radical evangelical movement that emerged during the late 80s and finally reached its pinnacle around the late 90s, early 2000s. And of course, many people had gotten swept up in this craze of a trend, and it became a very solid movement that entrenched itself in the American fabric of society, most notably in different areas, particularly like in rural areas where people would be more prone to this as opposed to urban areas, or say areas such as, I will call them out for what they are, like West Virginia or Texas. My father had become entrenched in it, and he also became entrenched in the charismatic movement, which is a branch off of the Pentecostal movement. These are both very extreme. They are borderline, like almost in the vein of like extreme Jehovah Witnesses who will deny their child medical care because they believe that faith above all things will heal. My father, unfortunately, belonged to this camp of such extremity of beliefs. And in many ways, this is a cult. It is not a cult in the legal sense, but the emergences of cults and the branches of cults emerged heavily in the late 80s and 90s. And my father, as I said, was swept up into this. He really bought into also the prosperity gospel, where if you have enough faith and do nothing else, you will suddenly get prospered by the blessings of God. And my father had believed in extreme social isolation. He severed himself off from the world. He became extraordinarily antisocial, very antagonistic. This also increased with his problems that he had of which was not diagnosed until many, many years later, of having a psychopathic temper. And he was diagnosed with psychoses. Most people thought he was bipolar, but it turns out correctly he was actually afflicted with psychoses. And I do want to clarify and give a disclaimer. We're not trying to pin the problem on that. It's just the religious authority compounds that, and it's very detrimental and very harmful to people who may be struggling with this. So the source of my father's, if you will, quote unquote, evil does not stem from the fact that he had this problem, but the fact that people using religious authority preyed on this vulnerability of his and basically warped him into the monster that he became. So yes, my father was very much part of a cult, but it was such of a cult that he did not want to interact with anyone. No church ever satisfied him. And he fully isolated myself, my mother, and the rest of our family into this very extreme source of isolation. We were not allowed to go outside and play. We were not allowed to go out and talk to other people unless he was there to approve of the social interaction. And as a result, I had grown up very, very isolated with no friends. I had no sense of individuality. And this is what forced, if you will, it's what prompted my father to put me in homeschool. He did not want me to be in regular public school. He claimed it was because of his own bad experiences, which I may want to add, there are flaws within the system. There's always flaws in every system, in every society, in every aspect of our society. But that in case, many other people have had good experiences with regular public school. And it all depends on how you carry yourself, your emotional maturity, and just learning to discern and ignore things. Like, don't buy into the bullying, don't succumb to different problems that arise. But he always claimed he did it out of love. He said he claimed he did it out to protect me, and he claimed he did it because I was intelligent and I didn't need to be held back by the dumbing down of the public school. So these were all very, I guess, in his eyes and maybe the eyes of other like-minded people, very valid reasons to keep me in this very extreme form of social isolation with a very, very questionable, disorganized, quote unquote, education.
Exactly. So the second question.
How was your homeschooling experience? What learning materials did you have, and what kind of tests did you do?
So I had enrolled from kindergarten to 12th grade. I was enrolled in a system called Christian Liberty Academy school system. It was founded by a radical evangelical in Arlington, Illinois. And it was very substandard, and it is not accredited. I'm not even sure how it is legal. It was done mainly through mail correspondence. So and they did not have any kind of set time period. You could enroll at any given point. Granted, it would have to be between a 3-month period of spring or fall. And what they would do from K to 12, you would receive this huge box that would have your textbooks, a very, very poorly put together syllabus, like it was printed on cheap printer paper and stapled in the most cheapest way possible. And you were also given a ream of paper, which constituted as your tests. So each textbook came with the actual textbook that you read, a small, slim workbook, and then, of course, the ream of paper that were the tests. And these, of course, were very poorly done. You just penciled it in with like a little circle, or like, say, something more advanced like chemistry or math. You had to show your work, and they would give you about this much space to actually show the work. But it was very, very substandard compared to modern standard learning materials that I have been exposed to and I have been studying, such as the ACT prep book from Princeton Review. I can clearly see the difference. But the learning materials were very substandard. They were very outdated. They were very poorly printed on very cheap pulp paper. It often looked like somebody photocopied it in the basement, which is essentially what Christian Liberty Academy is. It's simply a printing press founded in a basement. And they hobble this together and they charge an exuberant amount. When I say an exuberant amount, for the average person living in poverty in my area, which, by the way, I live in the Rust Belt, everything is rusty, falling apart. There's no economy, and 8 out of 10 people are addicted to alcohol and drugs because of the economic depression. So poverty is just riddled everywhere, right into the very core of our bones. But they would charge anywhere from $600 to $800, which, if you translate it in today's term of inflation, would be anywhere from, I would say $1,200 to $1,800 now, which for a very poor family living way below poverty line is an extreme burden to do, rather than, say, send your child to, your standard public school and, have much more resources. Although that said, we all know that there are problems with that as well as lack of funding, and the fact that most of the northern US does not bother to invest in its education. But with that said, the learning materials, of course, as I said, were very substandard. They were very outdated. Many of these textbooks had a copyright circa of anywhere from 1969 to 1974. This also includes science, math, as well as history, social sciences, even the grammar. These were very, very outdated, with a very outdated look, not relevant information. And a lot of it was so skewered and biased through a very conservative Protestant evangelical worldview that you were not allowed any kind of objectivity whatsoever. And also, you were also denied the tenets of critical thinking, which is such, it's so vital to have that foundation, that bedstone, if you will, in terms of not only learning how to reason and think and be a mature adult, but that's the very foundation of education and learning. So I was denied these. And for example, much of my science, like biological science, like geographical science as well, and what we had like earth science as well. A lot of these were based from creationism. And, this creationism was very extreme, very radical. We were taught that, evolution was not, valid or real, and that everything was done under this extreme viewpoint that the earth is only 6,000 years old or 4,000 years old in some cases, because they were never consistent with it. And it was very insistent on this worldview, and everything had this, white Christian American nationalist slant, whether it was science, even math, but especially with history, whether that was American history or world history, it was very slanted towards a very political bias. For example, not exposing the flaws or the evils, if you will, of the puritanical movement that set up this mess in America. Instead, painting them as, these blameless martyrs, or, painting the witch trials as something legitimate, as well as other things that sounded very borderline racist, like other nations, especially those that were like non-white, as being, untouched by the gospel and unenlightened by the gospel, if you will. So it had a very extremely, not only racist, but, very colonialist mindset in it. And it just didn't sit right with me. If you are brainwashed enough, you may start to believe it. But with me, it's like I would parrot and say I would believe it, because with my father, you couldn't have a different opinion. But it just sat wrong with me. But to move on to like the tests were just printed on paper. Like some of these tests were not even double-sided. It just looked like somebody printed it out and stapled the corner. And they were your average bubble test where you would take a pencil and circle in the right answer. And these were, many homeschoolers want to say, oh, my child is so smart, they're studying advanced. But in this case, that was not the case. These were extraordinarily dumbed down. And when I was comparing it to other tests, when I took the GED, I was surprised just how far behind it was. And one of the main tests I took was the California Achievement Test, which lo and behold is from the 70s. And it even employed graphics from the 70s and spellings. And it was so outdated. It looked like a relic that belonged in a museum or a movie documentary. So that was pretty much the gist of all my learning materials. I did not get anything really such as art, or anything that was, in for creativity or any of the humanities. Just basically these bare bone textbooks, an answer key, and these reams of paper that qualified as text. And many of these did not even come with a workbook. So that was pretty much the gist of my educational materials from kindergarten to 12th grade.
I see. So how would you compare, what you learned in homeschool to the GED, which you took back in 2016?
So when I took the GED in 2016, it was very much uncharted territory. For the first time in my life, I got to interact with an actual person. I interacted with two teachers, and one of them, of course, was for math. And I had never been taught math properly. To be honest, in homeschool, when you reach a certain grade, your parents just stop supervising you. Like they'll say, oh, do these lessons for today, and this is what you do. And then they just sort of parrot what's in the textbook. But you don't learn anything because no one's showing you the mechanics of math or the mechanics of grammar. The mechanics of grammar came easier to me because I was very driven by story and grammar and literature, which we'll get onto a later subject. But I never understood the mechanics of math, how to process math, or how to think mathematically. So not having any foundation or any concept of how to actually work with math, taking the GED really blew my mind. Like I said, for the first time, I was interacting with a teacher who on a board showed me how to do the functions of math and how to understand the mechanics of math. The materials were very comprehensive, unlike the very outdated vagaries and almost authoritarian tone and lack of explanation in the math textbooks. In fact, a lot of times in the math textbooks, there would be pretty much no explanation of how to go through the steps. It was just like, here is this. They give you a long paragraph of something, and then they let you solve this answer with no way of knowing if you actually know how to do it. So compared to the GED, it blew me away. I know a lot of people may consider it simplistic compared to others, but it was a vast improvement over what I had had previously.
Mm-hmm.
How about the ACT? How would you compare it to the ACT, which you are doing now?
So comparing the ACT, so I currently am studying with the ACT prep book for the 2022 version of the ACT exam. And this, of course, was issued and compiled by the Princeton Review from Princeton University. And I am blown away by the ACT. Not only is it extremely comprehensive, but each segment and chapter thoroughly explains things in a simple yet clearly communicative way. It is not bogged down by wordiness. It's not bogged down by a political agenda. And, and it also challenges you to go more advanced with your learning. And I have never enjoyed studying until now. Even with GED, although it was a vast improvement, there was a lack of disconnect with the textbooks, and it was somewhat low effort, just because, unfortunately, in the U.S. there is a stigma around the GED. So therefore, there's not a lot of effort. In fact, a lot of times when you go and say you have a GED, people will consider, do you have an intelligence problem, or are you a dropout, a drug out, a single mom? So there's always this stigma with the GED. So that's why there is not that much investment with it. But compared to the ACT is absolutely marvelous. I have conquered my fear of studying, and I've learned an effective way of how to study and understand not only the mechanics of math, but the foundations of science and scientific reasoning, more advanced into critical thinking, but also appreciating a stronger command of, English and grammar, as well as the mechanics of language itself, which is something where you think you may know it, but then when you learn it again, you become you gain a sense of more clarity in your communication than you had before. So the ACT has been absolutely marvelous, and I'm very, very happy with the different learning videos also provided by people who are preparing for this exam. And I'm deeply astounded by the quality. And I never knew that education could be this comprehensive or even enjoyable, and just letting my brain absorb that, having been denied these fountains of knowledge, if you will, for so long.
Overall, what were the effects of religious homeschooling on your social development? How did it affect your creativity and your work ethic?
So the effects of religious homeschooling were extremely detrimental. as I said, I'd grown up in extreme social isolation. I was not allowed to go outside and play with other children. I was pretty much kept locked in the house, if you will, especially dealing with the extremities of my father's violent rages and his psychosis. And he would always blame it on bad nerves, that he was working a lot and he had bad nerves and, trying to battle poverty. And there was also a lot of physical violence as well, which is probably another reason for the social isolation. So people would not find out about the physical violence and abuse that he especially inflicted on myself and my mother. It and the way I was trained to almost become like a very rigid adult, but not an adult in the mature sense, but have a set of these quote unquote polished manners in order to please my adult superiors, and not be a happy, full-fledged individual. Like everything was meant just to please and impress him or people he approved of. And it was always about making an impression, always about making an impression, never, having a satisfying social life or being a well-rounded individual. That didn't exist. You were just there to, be this perfect robotic model, with no choice or agency. And it made me have a fear of a lot of socialization because I felt socialization was a test to pass with everyone. And the isolation impacted me greatly. And it caused me to delve into a lot of maladaptive daydreaming to escape that kind of isolation. I was able to break away from it somewhat around 13, 14, when he allowed me, because out of necessity, to go to the local library to get certain books for book reports and everything. And I befriended some of the librarians. I finally learned how to use a computer because we were too poor to have a computer. And we had nowhere to put it because I lived in a very ramshackle apartment that should have been condemned, with hardly any wiring and whatnot. But that was my first taste of freedom. And I found great solace in the books of the library, but also having access to the internet. And I would go almost every other day to the library, and I befriended some of the librarians, but it was hard for me to socialize with other young people because socialization is, I think, a challenge for many people. We want to keep to ourselves. We don't want to reach out and connect. And you see that everywhere. I think most people, when they go under the anonymity of being online, they will be more open. I think it's as Oscar Wilde said, give a man a mask and he will speak the truth. And I think there is a lot of validity in that statement, because I reflect back and I think about the rewarding friendship I have formed with you and Hellevorn throughout the years. But that said, the impact that it had was very detrimental, very devastating. And for the longest time, I knew how to socialize. I knew how to present polished manners that would impress, especially, if you will, I'll come out and say it, the boomer generation, which always emphasizes good manners, but never being an individual. I always felt like a performative robot and that I was constantly being judged, because of my poverty or maybe my clothes or my obesity. And it makes you truly feel like something subhuman. It really does. And it had a very negative impact. And how it impacted my creativity, like I said, it forced me to go into maladaptive daydreaming, because otherwise I think the depression would have consumed me, and I do not know if I would be here had it not been, ironically, for maladaptive daydreaming and thinking about the characters and stories I read in books and literature, or other things that I consumed, such as, and I consumed these very clandestine, because many of the literature or even the comics, I'm a huge comic person. I'm picky with my comics, as we've seen in our previous podcasts, especially when it comes to My Man in Blue. But those things pretty much kept me alive, the only thing that was keeping me alive. And I just would just revert to these dream worlds, because that was the only thing I could look forward to, were these dream worlds, and thinking about these characters and maybe being a character myself and interacting with my favorite character, or going on an adventure with my favorite character. And for work ethic, I want to say that I think for the longest time it stymied my work ethic, because with the complications that come with this very heavy set of depression, if you will, and maybe that carries a lot of connotations, that particular label, but we'll just call it for what it is. It stymies your work ethic, because you think to yourself, you want to do a million and one things, but you can barely do one, because you don't have the confidence. You're not allowed to do it, and everything has to be done clandestine with no resources. So until 2015, when my father was evicted because of his aggressive behavior towards housing maintenance, I finally found freedom when he was no longer in a household with us. And it was the greatest freedom. And even up until this day, I am so thankful for that freedom to finally break away from that. And my work ethic has improved. It has improved over the years. And now I would have to say, especially after the transformative trip I have had meeting you physically, Fortunate, my work ethic has improved drastically, and I hope that it continues on an onward, upward slope of improvement. But it does stymie your work ethic, because when you are homeschooled, especially in this case, you're not given any rigid form of discipline. My mother, God love her, tried to set up a schedule. Like, we wake up at 8:30 and we do math at 9, and, things like that. But that only stayed until 7th grade, because then afterwards, once you reach junior high, everything falls apart, because your parents are not equipped to teach you anything beyond 7th grade. And my father never was truly involved in my education. He simply thought he would pay for it. My mother would show me what to do in a textbook, and that was it. Like, supposedly I was gifted and smart enough to figure it out on my own. I wasn't. And as a result, as soon as 7th grade hit, I had no schedule, I had no form, no structure. Therefore, I had no idea how to work or study. And none of the information was retained in my brain. Very few things made sense to me. And as a result, from 7th grade onward, my education was even more substandard than before. And for lack of a better word, it was an entire lack of education all around. But now what impacts my work ethic is this drive to improve myself and know that there are better things out there, and know that there is knowledge to be found and had, and that it is not an inaccessible ivory tower, but it is a fruit of hard labor that can be harvested by those who have the patience and diligence to go forward with it. And now I would want to say that my work in work ethic is now impacted by this just driven desire to get that, and hopefully achieve something in life, and get out of retail hell, if you will, and not be trapped, not be trapped, if you will, with the chickens in the chicken yard, but to hopefully soar like a bird in the sky. And I do not know what will come of it. I don't know if I will succeed, but I will, pardon my French, I will damn well try to try, no matter what, even if it is audacious.
And one final question. How strongly do you think religion factored into your homeschooling experience? Or in other words, what do you think about non-religious homeschooling, and how would it differ?
So, as I think we should put out a disclaimer, which I do want to point out, we are not by any means attacking any home alternative-based education. We're not attacking, educational alternatives that might be necessary for an individual who may have health problems, emotional or psychological challenges, or maybe they're in an area or environment that is dangerous to physically attend school. By no means are we attacking that. If people can find alternatives in educating themselves in the non-traditional way, it should be done, because unfortunately tradition does beget a sense of inaccessibility, and therefore it will create this sense of elitism, that it can't be accessed. It's the exclusivity of education, particularly in North America and the US. But how religion affected it? It affected it very deeply. It was, like I said, this very radical white Christian evangelical nationalistic movement, which is borderline. I don't, you know what? I will call it for what it is. It is almost borderline akin to almost like a neo-Nazi mindset. That is how it is. It really, truly is. And I'm calling for what it is. And I'm sorry if, actually, I'm not. I'm not sorry if this offends you. That is what it is. You out there, you right-wingers and all those other people, and I'm not glorifying the left or anything. They're just as bad with their rubbish. But you trying to say that you're holy and wholesome and all this purity culture and all your blonde, white flowered, wash hair daughters and sons, you are pretty much just perpetuating an Aryan stereotype of this white Christian perfectionism. And no, you're not helping your child. You're just making your child a social wreck. And they're going to be stuck unless you know people in your sort of little rich closed off community as a social wreck who's probably just going to be being at best maybe a customer service agent in a big box retail for the rest of their lives. And they won't get out, because once you get into retail, you seldom get out of it. But for the religion, like I said, it was very radical. Science suffered greatly because you're not taught real science. You're taught this really insane form of creationism that has no basis of science, especially when it comes to, say, earth science or, geophysics or, geology. Geology suffered greatly because it's like, oh, these layers of rock are only like 100 years old, when obviously it took carbon dating. What is that? Oh no, that's evil. That's a conspiracy to make you, dinosaurs are not real. Or here are these dinosaurs and they were actually like this. They were actually dragons or something, sent by the devil or something. But religion was very detrimental, and it made me have a very sour taste towards religion and Christianity. Now, don't get me wrong. I know what you're thinking, Tete, why do you have a bunch of crosses and Madonnas and, a little statue of Jesus and icons in the background? Well, I appreciate the aesthetic. I still have a respect for it. And I do appreciate the more broader applications of Catholicism and Orthodoxy, as opposed to Protestant. Protestants have no sense of aesthetics. Protestants, oh, here's a box. We all scream in this box. So Protestants have no aesthetic. And I do not want any Anglicans coming into the chat saying, oh, but we have stained glass. That you're from England. That doesn't count. You're from England. And that also goes for the Episcopalians with their brick sidewalks. That doesn't count. You're all English. But I'm talking about your, American Baptists. They have no sense of aesthetics. It's just a box where everybody screams and men are allowed to do God knows what to their families. But I appreciate the way these ideas have helped people sustain themselves through different social upheavals and political strifes and other things. And I also appreciate the ideas of discipline and virtue and things like that. So I do appreciate the discipline of the broader categorization of Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I know that they're two rather different schools, and heaven forbid we put, three of them in an elevator, the Protestant, the Catholic, and the Orthodox. It may get messy, but I appreciate it. And most individuals that I've met who are of these faiths, who are Catholic or Orthodox, were very welcoming, well-rounded individuals. And I like the aesthetic. I do. And also I like the aesthetic of the Madonna as, a female presence and energy. And, I appreciate, if you will, the tenacity as exemplified with the different saints through icons. And back right here, I have Albert Durer's I probably butchered his name because I can't pronounce German names very well, despite coming from an area where everybody has a German name. It's basically Michael overcoming Satan and his demonic horde. But for me, that picture means a lot to me because it is a symbol of overcoming the terrors of life, like maybe me overcoming my dad's abuse and challenges of poverty and other things. So just thought I would throw that out there and clarify. That's why I have that. And that's also why I collect rosaries, because I think rosaries are a good way of remembering that you can combat your anxiety and you have to remember what's important in life. But with all that said, the impact of religion was extraordinarily detrimental. I am not attacking religion per se, but I am attacking the fact that people abuse it and use it to hurt and harm people beyond belief. And they create these cults that ultimately damage people, all for the megalomaniac satisfaction of individuals, such as my father. So non-religious homeschool, if it is run by an accredited school and if it's overseen by competent teachers and it's reviewed properly and it's organized and executed in an orderly fashion, that it gives a student a structure and a foundation upon which they can garner a decent education, then I by all means support that. That is by all means very good. But this kind of religious fanaticism that I was subjugated to was not religion. It was simply brainwashing, cult brainwashing 101. And like I said, I have nothing against people who are doing home-based alternative for education. If you're doing it through an accredited, organized system, that is fine. I mean, if you can do that, we need more, traditional. We need more non-traditional means of education. But this kind of insane religious fanaticism that creates this vacuum and this whole mindset of bigotry and hate and abuse, as well as rampant misogyny, it's a great evil. And I can't tell you how many times I would have given anything to have escaped that and to have lived a normal life and to have discovered there are good things out there. Yes, the world is rife and rampant with many negative and terrible things, but if you look hard enough and you discern, you can find many great good things in this world, and that includes education. And my mind hungers for learning, and I wish I could have been given that. I hope it's not too late to get that. I hope I can learn, whether it be on my own or if I will be accepted, I don't know. But I'll certainly cast my net in the waters and see what comes, and I will take that risk.
Thank you so much. This was beautifully put. And, you explored something that really touched our hearts and the hearts of many who are listening.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak openly about this, because it is a great evil that should be exposed. And I think there's many people who are my age now who suffered the movement of the 90s, who are now reaping the horrors of it now.
Absolutely.
Tete, this has been really enlightening and very impressive to learn about all this. And thank you so much for your honesty. And you are an inspiring person to me. And I really admire your ambition and your strength. And thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today.
Thank you. Thank you also for your thought-provoking questions and your support. I really, really appreciate this. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.